two of the Tan were said to be the original inhabitants of Ireland, but they all disappeared underground into their dolmens and cairns and whatever you have. That's where the myth comes from, fairy folk, pixies.
The Daedanan being what English people would call fairies, ethereal otherworld spirits.
It's almost in the air here, some sense of otherworld or some sense of something more than the immediate.
Two of the Daedanan came to Ireland, and they brought with them the entire system of beliefs, the pantheon of the gods that was worshipped for maybe 2,000 years afterwards, and which still exists today. If you went back and tried to trace all of these superstitions, every single one would go back to that particular period in Irish mythology. They've left us all their beliefs, you know.
The Irish folk belief didn't kind of think of fairies as ethereal spirits. They were almost like another kind of human dimension.
Glenafooka.
They say it means the Glen of the fairies.
Definitely a lot of ghost stories been told here in the fairies and one thing another. It's heaven to me. I'm born and reared here.
It's up to whatever you want to believe, really, yourself.
Well, I mean, I believe in the fellow above all right, like, you know, I believe in God all right, like.
Who made God and who made the world and them all things, you know. I used to dream like this, I was dead. I was in another world. But one night it was very real now. I thought I saw Patty and another man like himself, and they going, and two armchairs, they going up in the sky, and they having a great laugh, the two of them. Well, that was so vivid in my mind, you know. I could see him, and as he was, going up to heaven or something.
Word of God, deliver us from the fear of death, Lord, have mercy.
In the sky, should they have to find it, and they'll have to find the moon, and they will. It'll be any place.
This idea of query, where do people go? Where do people go in the past? What is beyond the horizon? The daytime, it's bright, it's positive. It's the world of the living. And at night, it's the daytime of the dead. There are two sides to life, the life and death.
I often hear people telling stories or anecdotes in pubs about other people. And the other people are not necessarily alive. Some of them are dead, but they're spoken of as though they were still alive and still part of our lives. The dead are still part of our story. They're not put away and forgotten about.
We're not alone in the world, we're not alone on this island, that there were people here before us, that there are other dimensions to it. The human race doesn't own the landscape, it is ideas to share with another race or other races. Neither do they own all of time or the visions of time.
Sense of spirituality about the land in Ireland goes back into the ancient culture. The chief was thought of as marrying the land. Nobody thought of owning land. There used to be the pejorative term paganism when I was a boy. Actually, the origin of the word is not pejorative at all. I think it comes from the Roman sense of the countryside and of the gods inhabiting the landscape.
But they had a great sense of what? God not being far away, or the divine not being far away, that the divine being very near, not up in the heavens. So therefore you had your goddesses and gods of the rivers and the land, and in the land, in the earth. You don't worship the land, but you reverence the land because of its sacred, its creative energy.
mystical divine race who came to Ireland possessing all these different treasures, the spear of Lugh, the cauldron of the Dagda and whatever. And they travelled a very circuitous route to come back to Ireland because they came from an earlier race called the Numidians. And they brought with them the entire system of beliefs, the pantheon of the gods that was worshipped for maybe 2,000 years afterwards, and which still exists today, you know.
There may be sort of folk recollection of ancient history, of people before ourselves, of a different people being here. And there are all sorts of theories anyway, but to explain why such ideas should come about, that there would be a different kind of people living under the ground or even under the water. I mean, there are traditions of life under the lakes and the sea as well.
Pagan, a person who doesn't believe in the Catholic religion, before a person who worships, what were they called? The old gods, as they're called, like they worship nature and the sun and the wind and the elements.
I was brought up to believe the pagans or black heathens live in the jungle. And I've always found it offensive because the black heathens happen to have a system of religious beliefs that are probably superior to our own. Most of them are animists. When they talk about pagans in Ireland, they talk about, people who had a very sophisticated culture.
There are monuments around here where I live. There are Stone Age monuments that are 5,000 years old. The Celts only came here 2,000 years or so ago. So there were people here for the best part of 2,000 years. The people who built Newgrange, for the great Newgrange tomb and things like that, were pre-Celtic peoples we know very little about.
Newgrange was built 3,100 years before Christ, BC. It stands on an older structure, about 1,000 years older than that. The people who built it certainly weren't fairies. They were geniuses. They were sort of the Einsteins of their time. It's built to precise algebraic and geometric formula that predate Pythagoras, who supposedly invented algebra, and Euclid, who supposedly invented geometry, by about 2,500 years.
It's ancient. It's thousands of years old. The stones are built in the form of a passage that way, and there's a little passage going between them. And whatever reason, we don't know, I suppose, when the sun sets on the shortest day of the year, the sun actually shines straight into where the people were buried. So they were following the sun, or they had some symbolism or whatever it was, we don't know.
I would say that it is essentially a solar observatory because every stone on it is painted with solar symbols. They all relate to the cycle of the sun, the moon, and the stars, and that in turn gives, if you're a druidic caste, that gives you power over everybody else because you know the right time to plant, the right time to sow, and if, the locals don't do what they're told, you can tell them there's going to be an eclipse and you know exactly when it's going to be. You put the fear of God in them, you know.
I wouldn't win it that way when I was a child. I was afraid of it.
What were you afraid of?
Fairies. Before Lord was born, they walked around this land here.
But they certainly had a great sense of the seasons, and the year flowing with the seasons and the gods and goddesses being in the seasons. I suppose you think of Newgrange the other day, that terrible, terrifying thought that if the sun didn't rise, if it continued to spin out into darkness. So I suppose they lived in the fear of being left in darkness. And I suppose it was a little bit like if we don't do certain things properly, maybe the gods would be angry with us, How the message was interpreted since, but Christianity certainly didn't bring that message of being punished by a god.
It's the imagination at play. It's playing with water. The idea of what's under the water, what lives in the water. We have a lot of holy wells, or we have a particular type of geology. So water plays a very important part.
That the holy wells, blessed wells as we'd call them, they were all pagan wells before they were Christianized. And this notion of seeing the little white fish or the white eel at the bottom of the well if you're supposed to get your cure. There's something in that is certainly not Christian. Why fish? Why eel? Why white? Why would no other colour do? If you could follow these things back, I'm sure there is some kind of explanation, but maybe not a factual explanation.
The well custom still survives. There's a layer of Christianity over it now, but I was there last July, in fact. But people still go to the well, that's the point. You know, the well is very much pre-Christian.
Moultrie Well now is a great well down there. The time, you know, deep well. And you walk that stream every so during the pattern of mountain. You walk that stream, you get rid of all aches and pains and legs and everything, you know. And then there'd be lads down on the step at the bottom of the well, it was deep well, like. And they'd have all these tin pints, you know. And then you'd throw the money down to them. They'd give you a pint full of water, you know, and you drink it. All that, you know.
But I'd say that quite a lot of the people who go there still wouldn't be quite able to say what it is that brings them back, other than custom and the fact that they grew up with it. There used to be a saying about the well that by the time the pattern, which was patron saint's day at the well, by the time that came on the second Sunday in July, the flowers should be on the potato plants, on the potatoes in the fields. The blossom should be out. The salmon should be in the river, and the hay should be ready for saving. So there's an obvious connection between the well and its custom and celebration, and the sense of the fertility of the land and the renewal of life, and this lovely well gushing continuously from the ground. So that is, if you like, natural religion.
I went to the Pattern Well, I wasn't well years ago. And my mother used to get out the bed here, me, out of the bed here. Tommy, he said, you'll do an act of charity for me. She said, for your health reasons. I will, mother. I said, what do you want me to do? Go up and walk the stream in Pattern Well and Moultrie, he said. There's a great cure. So I went up and got me a rosary piece, said the 5 decades. Went around you can look at the well now. Went around the well, went into the stream, walked up again, went around the tree again, you see the tree is still there, down 9 times. And you must do that before sunrise or after sunset. The plenary indulgence of that. You know what I mean now? I'm sure you were brought up a Catholic, were you?
Yeah.
You must have been.
I suppose the Catholic practice went back to around wells, and the priest would have led the people in these sacred sites. They would have been used to going out into the open because they had no churches and they weren't allowed openly, in a sense, to practice their faith.
In rural Ireland, there are many of the ancient beliefs practiced right up to what I call modern Christian times, modern Catholic times. When I was young, I remember going on a rosary procession where we said 10 decades of the rosary or something like that, walking, as far as I can remember, anti-clockwise around a standing stone. Now that's older than Christianity, that particular ritual.
The church realised how gullible the Irish were. And lots of things like they weren't supposed to say unto a priest. They took that on board and wrote it into catechism and things like that. You understand me now? Oh yeah. Oh God in heaven. You wouldn't be supposed to say anything to a priest.
But see that a priest had, you see that they had it. It was dangerous saying to the priest if a priest turned on you.
Well, I mean, I've seen it, like, you know. I've seen it, like, you know. They say that if they do it, it's a terrible crossing if they do it. That's what we were told now in our younger days, like, and if a priest did say something like that to a person, it's an awful crossing the priest for the rest of his time.
She was cursed by a priest because she fought for the priest about the getting of this house. But her father was to get her something out.
Father Shine cursed him on the wayside, and he said that the people done it. The fishes got inch by inch of them, that the birds could pick it, and that's what happened. They died whole, and their places She went for a song.
And I remember the night distinctly they got that man to pray for rain. I don't think it has stopped raining since.
They wouldn't curse nowadays, I wouldn't say they would.
They believed in curses. They believed that so-and-so, and the most lethal of all there was a widow's curse. You know, if she cursed you, you're for it.
I remember he talking to me about the widow's curse, and he was sort of a bit afraid of a widow's curse because of something that happened between somebody and somebody belonged to him and a widow that was sort of recently widowed and that.
A widow have the power to curse if she's wrong, badly wronged. To say that a widow's dead, that's how it was understood in Ireland. That the widow's curse, they call it, like, you know.
There was that fear in people. I mean, they didn't believe in it. I don't believe in it. But then again, if something like that happened to you, would you be... It would frighten you.
You wouldn't know but a widow woman or someone with 4 or 5 children and know where to go and all that. There might be something, a thing like that. Of course you'd be an awful conscience to have known you'd have to die.
A widow with a family and to fight against the world to raise her family. And she has to have some strength and be a very able sort of person. So I suppose they would sort of consider, well, she's given power to do a lot of things that otherwise wouldn't happen, like, you know. She'd be a sort of a strong person, it'd have to be.
You had a lot of key, strong women in the tradition. Yeah. And in the Irish folklore.
For centuries upon centuries, we had more saints than anybody else per square inch in this country. What was brought to the President or that particular Pope's attention was the fact that they were all pagans. St. Bridget is our patron saint, our female patron saint. She became sort of nunnified, turned into a nun, supposedly.
She was a pagan in her time, I suppose. She was around St. Patrick's time, sure. You know, and she found a monastery up in Kildare, the wood of the oaks, St. Bridget.
St. Patrick was real. He stood on 2 legs and walked. All the other saints, except for St. Lawrence O'Toole and Blessed Oliver Plunkett, were all two-a-day down.
The stories were told that St. Bridget wanted to start a convent, so she went to a local farmer and she took off his cloak. And this was told to us as religion, as Catholicism. We had to believe in this. This was the miracles of St. Bridget. It happened. We were told it happened. We believed absolutely that it happened, and the teachers who were teaching us believed it happened. She took off her cloak and she spread it on the side of the hill, and the farmer had said to her, "I'll give you as much land as your cloak will cover," because he didn't want to give her any land. So she put her cloak on the ground, and her cloak grew and grew and grew and spread over the fields. And also her father was a pagan, and he wanted her to marry a pagan king. So she plucked her eye out to make herself ugly, and she threw it on a rock, and a rock became a well. And on school tours we would go to Glen, and the teachers would take us to this well. And this was the well where St. Bridget had thrown her eye on top of a rock, and it sprouted water.
There were odd people who still did things. I mean, they still go out and they tie rags on bushes on St. Bridget's Day and things like that. But that's sort of more of a you know, keeping up an old tradition or something like.
There are the custom of making St. Bridget's cross. There's also the custom of the Brat Frida, where they put out a piece of cloth on the eve of the feast. And the tradition has it that the spirit of the saint is abroad on the eve, and that the dewdrop that falls on the Brat Frida has curative powers.
Do you ever hear the Brat Frida? I do that all the time when I think of it. If you put out, you'd put out, my mother used to put out an old toy, man's toy, put that out on the door on the night before the feast of St. Bridget, and that's supposed to be a cure for headache.
In the middle of all this sort of religious belief, you do have a huge amount of pre-Christian beliefs that are contained within it. It's useful that it survives, because with it survive a lot of the more sort of, you know, odd bits of religion left down to us from our forebears, you know. All the locals believed in fairy spirits, and, you know, they'd leave milk out for them at night. They could also practice a lot of malevolent, I suppose you wouldn't call it witchcraft, but cursing, where they could curse a rack of hay and it could bring it to ruin. But I think how they did that was by putting sort of, you know, usually rancid butter at the bottom of the pile that rotted everything from the, you know, from the bottom up.
Most Irish people go around what they call a May bush, the 1st of May. And now there are some beautiful customs. There'd be eggs put in a garden, or there'd be potatoes. And this was supposed to be done deliberately. It's supposed to be your enemy. When you come on, then that was their curse, that your potatoes would go bad. Are you with me now?
People had a very strong sense that there was such a thing as evil, and that it could be visited on people, and that they would visit it on each other occasionally, because human nature being as it always is, people have fall out with one another and have bitter enmities with each other now and then, and especially tribal society, I think.
They were deeply religious, a lot of them, and they believed in the power of evil, more so than we do now, I suppose. And they just decided, well, that came out here and there.
People that you had anything in for, if possible to destroy them, you put eggs in there among the spuds, and you put butter on the handle of the door or the latch and all that kind of stuff.
And I see both of them every window it is gone by. The both of the windows.
There was sort of what appeared to be sort of to him was butter on the post, the gate post, like, you know, and he was a bit worried about it, like, you know, was it somebody that was trying to do him harm? Deep down, there would be that little bit of fearing you of somebody.
Butter, of course, was a product of milk, and that was if you had cows, they'd go dry, they'd have no milk. So, God, we were full of them, dear. Oh, God help us. And absolutely the things were done, nobody's business.
I'll tell you what you're doing on the 1st of May. Get up before sunrise, walk out in the fields, and the dew on the grass, and you'll never have corns or chimblends.
His dad looked to whitewash in the month of May, so they usedn't to do it anyway, nobody.
No, if you didn't do it, at the end of April wasn't fine, you'd forget about it the 1st of June.
One year, and it was never done before, and it happened to be done in May. And my father died suddenly the 6th of December. They say whitewash in May, and you wash the head of the house.
They were very superstitious.
Well, we're all superstitious in some ways, you know. I mean, the world is full of superstition. I mean, look at astrology, for example, you know. I mean, that's big business everywhere, in urban societies everywhere. People don't think of themselves as superstitious. People think of themselves as late 20th century rational people. But actually, if you scratch deep, you'll find almost everybody has some little superstitious belief about something, you know. I mean, I remember my father wouldn't get out of bed on Friday the 13th. And he was a well-educated, intelligent man. And he just wouldn't, and there are probably people like him all over the world.
I met this woman a short time ago in Ennis, a complete stranger to me. She walked up to me on the pavement and she says, "Do you mean to tell me that that kind of superstition is still in Ireland?" And I said to her, "Yes, it is. Go to any church on Sunday and wait outside the door and we'll have a look." Walked away. You know, people are so, what should I say, conventional minded when they think of things like that. This is religion, that's superstition, this is good, that is bad, without ever thinking about it.
The point, I think, about folklore and about folk belief is that it had a use in the past. It explained the world to people, and it was a repository of belief and of ideas, and helped to explain the world, to their own world and the universe to people, and is therefore very deserving of respect, I think. It only becomes a bit ridiculous to our minds when it becomes disconnected from its original meanings.
Halloween is a pagan festival of the spirits. All Hallows Eve, when the spirits are back near the earth.
Samhain was the opening of the gate between this world and the next, essentially. It became then All Saints and All Souls Night, and eventually Halloween. It's an old Celtic festival, always has been. That's when the ghosts were free to come out and sort of give us all a hard time. That's when we were free to go and look at them.
Since nobody has ever distinguished in Irish folklore between the fairies and ghosts, they always run into each other. There's no clear dividing line.
The ghosts are kind of more or less people died long ago, bad people and good people died long ago, but mostly bad, I suppose, like, you know.
I'm fully convinced that the souls in purgatory can come back and look for help. And there's always saying that there's hate things going on in Mahoney's of Glenafooka.
Glenafooka, when we played English and put Glen on it. Glenafooka. Glen of the Ghosts.
It was the best spot ever and always to a lot of people wouldn't pass the night time. They got the name and that's that, I suppose, you know.
They said there were ghosts around, I don't know.
Saw the headless coach. He used to go down every evening, one of the cows, and he looked down, he saw the headless coach down a couple of fields down. He was in the top of the hill and he was looking down, and he saw it. Horses, no heads, and they'd drawn a coach. We won't sleep till all tonight, we're thinking of all the ghosts.
I suppose the ghost stories made people afraid of the small people. They were probably never in it. Maybe they were, we don't know. We don't know.
The fairies are a different people, whatever you could call them, but they're not human, whereas ghosts are, or were.
They believed in fairies. That poor woman up in Ballyradley, they thought that, and actually what was wrong with the woman, she was finding away in bed. She had tuberculosis, I'm really certain. She was finding away, and what they thought, that the fairies took her to the fairy force and substituted another woman. So I was telling you last night, he was taken out of the bed, the poor priest, kind of a ritual, hold her over the fire. Are you a witch or are you a fairy? Are you the wife of Michael Carey?
And they reckoned that Mrs. Cleary, Bridget, had been taken and a changing left in her place. And there's lots of different theories, and a lot of it, some people have said that it's a sickness she had, it wasn't recognised at the time. And that's why she at one stage she said her face went purple and this kind of thing, and they reckon that's all it was.
She got delicate, you see. Started losing all the flesh, you see, and got awful pale and awful thin. She was fading away that way.
Yeah.
And then they thought the fairies would have to take her. You see, they thought the fairies was working.
The tradition was that the fairies would take away the real person and they'd give you back one of their own, disguised as your relative or your wife or husband, or whoever it was.
Again, you ask any of the authorities on the fairies and they'll tell you that the fairies' blood is not red. And that begs another question. You say, why? And the story it leads to is, there's the reason why fairies abduct human beings. Because their blood is not red. They can never get into heaven again. So they need to get that red blood. You know, there's almost a sort of vampirish something there.
I laughed when I thought of that clock of gold, but the fairy was laughing too. I can't
A lot of those, the fairies, They didn't do any harm to people. They could. Because the difference between the Irish fairies and these little, Celtic twilight fairies, the Arthur Rackham kind of illustrations and all that stuff, the difference between those kind of fairies and the real thing is that you didn't meddle with the Irish fairies. If you did, you always came off second best.
The whole idea of fairies is to some extent a kind of a modern invention in the kind of terms we think about it. I mean, the Darby O'Gill and the Little People kind of Walt Disney-ish leprechaun kind of thing. It's much deeper than that, because the sense of there being a more primal people inhabiting the landscape.
And people who interfered with their forts or interfered with fairy paths or fairy bushes, there were consequences.
The moment is the motorway being built from the country towards Dublin, and right now it has to take a diversion around the ferry mound because the workmen simply wouldn't shift it. I'd say they were very sensible.
With that fairy bush that we're talking about down there, when I went to the archaeologist there, back last April or thereabouts, when I saw that they were actually beginning to dig that field, I didn't know what they were doing first. I didn't realise that the road was coming that way. I said to the archaeologist in charge, and the engineer, in fact, I said, and I was serious, I said to them, do you know what you're doing? Because when you're gone, when all the plans are rolled up, and when the highway is built and this tree is demolished, are you going to take responsibility for the consequences, for the people who are going to get killed here, for the people who are going to get injured, innocent motorists who know nothing, including myself maybe? I'll have to pass here twice a day, I said. And I said I wouldn't like to let it pass without telling you. And the reaction of the archaeologist, the woman in charge, says, oh my God, she says, don't, she blessed her so, oh my God, she says, don't say that. But I said, I'm not saying it at all. It's going to happen. I said, I know places where fairy forts have been clipped in order to widen roads. And the number of accidents at those places, out of all proportion to what it should be on a good stretch of road with a decent, surface and good visibility, lots of accidents that shouldn't happen. Why? Explain that to me, somebody.
Fairy mounds are essentially little rises you'd see in a sort of a flat field, and they're usually cairn burials.
Oh God, no, it should be a big square, a big round square, Oh, it should be big, something like a quarry,
An embankment all around, wouldn't be settled, it'd be kind of oblong, or what you will. And that was to be supposed to be the fairies. Well, I'd say a better explanation was there were places of fortification, and if there was a tree, anything in it, they wouldn't cut it. And people told me, one man told me, that this farmer did away with the fort and he was sent ploughing it, and he told me something happened to him, and he wouldn't go near it. He took one again for £1 million, but I don't know if he 10 me lies or 10 me the truth. I just don't know.
Or any horse couldn't go into ploughed or anything. They'd be dead. They'd die.
Across from my gate now there was to be a shed built, a shed for cattle, and when they came to survey it, they said they were forced and anything couldn't be built.
You tread very warily when you're dealing with beliefs like that. I'll give you two examples. A better example actually would be the DeLorean factory, which was built in Dunmurry in Belfast. DeLorean is the guy who invented the Back to the Future car. He built this massive, not him personally, but his company built this massive factory up in Dunmurry. And they were warned before they ploughed the land not to destroy a fairy tree in a fairy mound. And they did. And the consequence is pretty obvious to me anyway.
Oh, they couldn't be then. Oh, shouldn't be. Look.
Years ago, and I remember when that was in my time, they two men
Yeah, they went and cut all the bushes on it and interfered with it. And, you know, it was laughable, really, God forgive me. But the two men that were employed to do it died very, very quickly, youngish men. And the funny part of it was the gillet that they had drawn home, the Scots perished.
Perhaps there's some, you know, I won't say curse, but there's some very strong spell, whatever you want to call it, laid on the particular land at a particular time to prevent people, you know, interfering with it. And maybe that accumulates over the centuries, you know.
No, the old people were smarter than us in many ways. We're so smart that we think we know it all. In the older people, if there was ever any hint that there was a fairy path, what they'd do is, and they had a cure for all these things, very practical indeed. They'd get 4 hazel sticks, solid ones, and at the corners of the proposed house, before anything was built or dug, they'd hammer down the sticks of a night, and good and solid down, you know, so that a cow or a horse or anything wouldn't be able to move them. And they'd wait. And if those sticks were moved, then don't build. Leave it alone. You're building in the wrong place. And if the sticks were left on their own, left unmoved, safe, go ahead.
Never know how fairies work. They could be very worldly or they could be very otherworldly, you know. But I wouldn't mess with them, put it that way, you know. It's not me being superstitious. I honestly do feel that it would be very foolish if I saw what was called a fairy wrought on a piece of land that I owned and decided to build my house on top of it. I think it'd be very foolish, you know. So I'm neither believing or disbelieving, I just pay attention, you know.
No point playing with fate or chancing your arm like that. There's another story, my friend Barry Costello, his mother knew this lad. The farmer was ploughing up his field, ploughing up this old field he had, and he came across fairy fort, and he was trying to get guys to do it, but the guy that was ploughing the field refused to do it. He went off, so the farmer was there for ages trying to get people to do it. Eventually he got one guy to go in and cut the trees and plough it up. He paid your man something like £200-300 to do it. So your man went in and started cutting it, but the chainsaw he was using broke down on him. Something went wrong with it, so he brought it into his garage, and his 2-year-old child was sitting there with him, and he started fixing the chainsaw, and no one knows what happens next, but somehow the chainsaw started up and your man lost his hand over it.
In other words, like, feel that's stupid that you'll destroy a fort. Well then, you're bringing on yourself something that I'm not wishing it on you. And when he's saying, look lads, which is more important, your job or your life?
Well, actually, I know this one. To do with the Celts. When the Celts first arrived, the first people here were the Tuatha Tan. They are fairy folk, is what they're called. They used to worship the sun, the earth, and all the elements, but when the Celts came, they went underground.
The myth comes from pre-Celtic invaders of Ireland called the Tuatha Danann came to Ireland. And they took it from the indigenous inhabitants who are primarily North African. They in turn were suppressed by a later tribe called the Milesians. Both tribes were returning to the Promised Land in the sense that Ireland was their Promised Land. When they came here, they defeated the Tuatha Danann, and they gave them a choice of ruling the country with them. And when the Dananns refused, they were told that they could have everything that was below ground, and the Milesians would have everything that was above ground. And they in turn became, you know, underground dwellers, supposedly. This is the mythology. In actual fact, what happened was that they were assimilated, just like the Normans, just like the English were. And they became part of what we now call the Irish race. The mythology of fairies goes back a lot longer than that.
The fairies, the only factual thing about them is that there are places that are regarded as theirs, be they fairy bushes, or fairy trees, or fairy forts, or fairy paths, or hills, of course, and you'd be better off not to interfere, because if you do, there'll be consequences.
See, there's a lot of stories around. Some of them are a bit unbelievable, some are a little more realistic, but it's up to the person themselves what they want to believe.
That's one version, but I can't be sure. There's no, you can meet anybody in Ireland, they can't give you a satisfactory answer to you. No. No, indeed.
Banshee simply means the woman, fairy. She is sort of translation to English as fairy, you know.
Oh, the Banshee was in it all right. Dressed in white, all in white, combing her hair. And she'd come in the night and keen, that she's called, you know. Ooh.
She's supposed to look like, what is it, a woman all in white, long white robes flowing in the wind, no physical form, long hair down to her knees, which just blows in the wind. And she's not supposed to have any actual facial features. You're not supposed to be able to define that now.
Well, the Banshee we had that night anyway, you know, yowling like a cat.
Oh, sure, I had the Banshee one night. I was here on my own at 14 years of age. And the following night a neighbour of mine crashed, and then during that night then he passed on. That's all there was to tell you, like. I just heard the Banshee crying, that's all. But not much more to I just heard the person crying down there. In the night of that night. And it wasn't a human. But that more to tell you, like. I shall have presumed to the Banshee. I mean, the following evening the chap crashed, and he passed on then during that night. So I mean, there must be something in that, isn't there? I don't know. Do you? But sure, what would she helm you for? Why's she going to helm you for? Woman that passed on me generations before that, I don't know. She must have some contact with the next fold. A person that there was another person that's passing on. So now, where do you go from here?
I actually thought somebody must have been literally tying a cat up and strangled or something, you know. But I went out onto the window with my lump of turf, and there was nobody there, nothing there, but you could hear this way, and suddenly my hair began to stand up, and I thought, Jesus Christ, that's really strange. I did the best thing, which is to get under the bed, cover my head, and try to block it out, you know. But the next morning, anyway, I got up, and there was a bang on my door, Mrs. Cummins come up the stairs, to tell me that Frank had died. And I said, how do you know that? And she said, oh, I know it, poor Frank is dead, he's after dying. Now, Frank lived in New York, we were living in Dublin, you know. And 3 days later, a telegram arrived to say Frank had died at that particular point in time, you know. So since then, I thought that was definitely a Banshee. That's the only time I've ever heard anything like that in my life. But don't ask me to explain it. No idea.
Apparently, when he was getting this hay, and he was getting it, I suppose, where he shouldn't be getting it, maybe, but he heard the Banshee. And he dropped everything and ran home, and he was as white as a sheet, and he was frightened out of his life, and he got an awful fright. But and somebody in the area, somebody belonging to him, had died on the night, now, as it so happened. Now, believe it or not, it could be anything.
My two aunts, they saw her. You know, they're cutting cabbages in the yard or something. It was summer's evening, and she came along and passed them by. And she come in her hair. She took no notice that they didn't have hair like.
They used to believe long ago, not all right, you know. Yeah. When a person would be passing on, yeah, she was supposed to be sitting there, combing her hair and crying out, you know.
It's a very consoling belief. It's a very nice one. It's very consoling. It's family. It's the idea that it's one of your ancestors, that somebody has come to take you away, that somebody is going to cross over with you, and you join the community of the dead of your ancestors on the other side. At least that's how people have worked it out down over the centuries. So you're not going on your own. You're accompanied by one of your own. So it fits in with people's desires and requirements and sense of identity and so on, I think.
Although when I was very young, I was terrified and it was a negative image. Now when I think back, I like the image of this extremely powerful old hag or beautiful woman or whatever she was, combing her long hair and terrorizing the natives. I thought it was, we appropriated it as a positive image.
Who's very beautiful, but of course there's also death. That is the other side of beauty, it's death as well, as the banshee is. And then being the protectress of the land, being the goddess of war. So you have many dimensions, many imaginations and conceptions of the other world. It's the land of women. It's the land of the dead.
All the old people long ago, you know, they had all them stories and everything, you know, but today every road is so busy with cars and everything, they must have killed them all.
That's why I say, you know, the tragedy is that thousands and thousands of these stories have been lost just because the old people haven't been got on time.
They'll have an interest in it, you know what I mean? It's folklore, it's interesting, you know what I mean? Not many people my age do now, but it's fun, you know what I mean?
One of the characteristics of every age is that it looks back on previous ages as unlearned, irrational, underdeveloped, less intelligent than we are now, you know? And I think that's one of the great fallacies of every age. I mean, the world is full of all sorts of voodoo beliefs, including diet, for example. As you know, there's probably more voodoo about diet in the world now than there is about anything else. But people don't recognize it as voodoo, or as superstition, or as irrational belief. Whereas the old beliefs of the past, I think, in Ireland, they were a way of explaining the world in the past. They were a way of explaining existence to people. And they seem strange to us because we think we're people who have come out of the Enlightenment and out of science and the modern world and modernization. But I'm not at all sure that we don't have our own superstitions.
Traditional society knew the patterns, so they're not confused in their mind about it. We are. And we are imposing these confusions on them now.
I don't know. We don't really care in this country. We really don't care. It's depressing. But you wouldn't want to be too depressed, because that's the way the Irish are. They don't care. And now with the huge change around in the last 10 years to this money economy, it's got even worse. Because, you see, if you had a bit of culture, money then, you could handle it. But Irish people don't have any culture. And then, money on top of that, well, you can see the results. Everything now is measured in money terms. You're only good if you've got plenty of money, or if you're getting big price for land, or you're making $1 million, or the real things that would last, they're not valued. But the consequences of that are going to be extraordinarily severe a generation or 2 generations down the road. Then we'll see.
The fact that I think all humans need this other world. We can't just live We can't just live in this super rational scientific world that we're born, we die, we rot on the ground like a tomato. We want more. We want to believe in this. And I think the human mind is intensely religious and also intensely connected to other worlds beyond the world we're seeing just in front of our eyes. Whether that exists or not, or whether it's a product of our imagination, I don't know, but I know that everybody seems to need it.
There's more in this world than we think about, than we know about. I'm convinced of that.
That's Ireland, yeah. That's Ireland.
God help us. Them are the days.
Let me ramble along the prairie. Seeking spears and old barrels with my body slim and tame. Give me my boots and saddle,